And so, yeah, the idea that the first million words suck, I mean, that's absolutely correct. And that, I mean, it's just one of those things where anything you do, you're not very good at first. And the more effort you put in, the more you build your skill level, the more you level up that skill. And so that's absolutely correct. And so to anyone who's thinking about undertaking writing, just be prepared for that. Enjoy it. And I had a lot of passion for it when I started out. And I still enjoy what I'm doing. It's not that burning hot, like, it's midnight, my kids are asleep, my wife's asleep, let me go work on a book. No, I do it all day, every day, and that's good enough.
Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to today's episode of Might Help, Can't Hurt, conversations with leaders, doers, and friends. And I think my guest today, Robert Crane, is pretty clearly in the doer section. He's written over. Now, it said on your bio, which I'm guessing you haven't updated in 3 years, that you were the author of over 50 books. I've read over 50 of your books, so you've got to have written more than that.
I think the count is 63 myself, and then another 22 co-authored.
Oh, okay. Okay. So just the 85.
Yeah.
And that's since 2011?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So that's just funny. It's like I'm the guy in my world that people think is prolific because I've done 12 books over 20 years.
Yep.
And it's like I basically wanted to bring you on to make myself feel bad about myself. When did I know you started, from what I read, that you started writing on purpose, like for a result in around 2011, but had you been writing your whole life?
Yeah, I mean, I remember distinctly in second grade, my teacher gave me a writing assignment that was essentially one of those things where it's like, here's 10 spelling words that we really want to emphasize for you. Now take them and arrange them into a story somehow. And I remember my mom and I sitting down and really going through that, and I got called out for extra praise from the teacher for it. And so from that, it's like, oh, I can get attention in a good way from this rather than in a bad way from, stealing candy or whatever I was doing at the time. I mean,
yeah,
graders get up to. And so it set early on the expectations in my head that, oh, I can write. And so another sort of story, I wrote my first book for my teacher in fourth grade and got, positive feedback for that. And it just sort of spiraled from there. I went to college to become a writer and an author. And so
is there a major in writing as an undergrad?
English creative writing track. So there were 3 tracks. There's tech writing, there's literature, and then there's creative writing. And so I did the creative writing one. And it taught me nothing. I mean, I think I finished one short story during that time, and it's okay. But I think of all of the classes that I took, which over the course of 4 years was probably 40 classes, maybe, maybe 5 of them were about creative writing. So, I mean,
what were the rest of them about? Grammar? Or
I did. Well, yes, I had grammar classes. I had math classes. I mean, I had all the basics that you need in order to get an AA and then a BA. And so, I mean, the problem is if you wanted to become a writer, even coming out of that, it was very clear. One of my professors, the creative writing professor, said flat out, she's like, look, it's really tough to get a job as an author. She had published a few books at that point, and it's very hit or miss in the traditional publishing world. You have to acquire an agent and submit to them. And then from there, they will take your work if they like it, and then they'll shop it around to the publishing companies. And so, traditionally, you're only publishing 1 book a year, perhaps. And back then, I think the average advance was like $5,000, and that's an advance against earnings. And typically,
no, I know.
You don't make any more than that on it. And in fact, I mean, nowadays, I think it's closer to $2,500. It's actually gone down. And so, most writers aren't Stephen King making millions and millions of dollars. Most of them have another job, and they write occasionally in their, part-time as a side hustle or as a hobby. They don't make hobbyist money from it. And so when I looked into it coming out of financial services, I'm like, this isn't a viable career path. This is a hobby thing. And then I looked again and found the world of self-publishing, where you can publish as many books as you want.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, well, this is actually a viable business, I guess you could say. And so I took what I'd learned in the world of financial services and actually learned to start finishing books instead.
Right. Well, those early books, you were writing them while you were still in financial services. So it was day job, dream job kind of a thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was very much this is a hobby that I really enjoy. But one of the things that happened is because I hadn't really internalized the fact that you're only supposed to write one book a year or whatever, I discovered I could write a lot really fast.
Did they not send you the manual, dear?
Yeah, that's a problem. I mean, I didn't. After I went to college and I got the really 2 classes. I'm serious when I say this. Of those 5 classes, 2 of them were for fiction creative writing. So there just wasn't a lot of instruction, helpful or otherwise, about how to get a career as a fiction writer. It was a very murky path after that. Like, it was just basically left with the idea of, well, you're probably going to have to get a job in something else. And it did.
Now, did you read a lot?
I did. A lot of sci-fi, a lot of fantasy. Well, a lot of sci-fi at the time.
Yeah. Who did you like?
I was a big fan of Peter David, who was a author. He wrote a lot of Star Trek books. I love Star Trek tie-in fiction. I read a lot from an author named Michael Stackpole, who wrote in another. I like universe fiction. Like, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was not a new concept to me because I grew up with comic books, but there was another fictional universe called BattleTech that I was a very big fan of. They would have, they had 50 different authors writing in that universe, and they, put a new selection would be released every month. And so it was just a thing where if you're a voracious reader, you're always looking for what's the next concept you can buy into. And I really loved those shared universes and those large canvases that they kind of painted on. So
yeah, I think the Dune books were my first alternate universe. Yeah.
I liked Asimov too, and it was really interesting because he connected later on. He connected his Robot series and his Foundation series, which were my 2 favorites. Those were amazing, and
those were actually the first sci-fi books I ever read. So my brother was into them, and so he had them on the shelf. And I would once I graduated from the Hardy Boys and Tom Swift.
I loved Hardy Boys and Tom Swift. They did a revival in the 80s, actually, that I got really into. Hardy Boys Case Files. It ran for 130 books or something.
Well, that's what I love. People, my wife is a Netflix binge watcher. Right. I can't do that, but man, can I binge read?
Yeah.
Like, if I get a good series, that's why you're like my dream author, because it's like by the time I finish one, there's 3 more. Did you? So you set out pretty much from the beginning with that in mind, that you wanted to write universes, that you wanted to write within universes?
No, I mean, especially for like Girl in the Box, for instance, I had a 10-book vision in mind, and I think you can see. I mean, it's fairly self-contained. When I got to about book 7, though, it had done very well for me, and I like money. Money is a good thing. I like paying my bills.
There you go.
But if that was just the only thing about it, like, I was creatively out of ideas at book 7, and I'm heading to book 10, and I'm like, I'm just done with this series. A lot of my author friends have experienced this, where they just get to close to the end of a series, and they're like, I just want to be done with this. I want to be out. I still had ideas, and more kept coming up all the time. And I'm like, I'm really enjoying this. And I think this character can go farther. I think there's more to be said and done in this universe. And so around book 7, I was reading a review, something I never do anymore, but I was reading a review, and someone had said something that immediately triggered the, like, this is how you go farther from here, past the end point you had envisioned. And I mean, I just kind of took it and ran with it. And I've always told fans, like, I'll keep writing them until I get to the point where I feel like I can't creatively do anything different. But I mean, I'm on 44 right now, and I'm still enjoying it. Like, I've started it in December and kind of took a couple of weeks off for Christmas, and have been going since then. And I think I'll wrap it up next week, probably the first draft. And I mean, it's still fun. Like, I'm still enjoying sitting down and jotting my ideas in the morning for, like, what do we do next?
So how far out are your arcs? Like, do you think 2-3 books ahead, or?
No, it's a little more murky than that. In fact, I have the next 3 or 4 arcs planned out, but I don't necessarily know what the next book is going to be all the time. I just decided what the next book in the Sienna series is going to be. Like, I know the broad movements of the plot, but a lot of times I'll have an idea. Like, I had one 3 months ago, and it is going to be the next book. I was doing some reading on like the Weather Underground and the Radicals of the 70s. And I got an idea that that's the next book. It's called Underground. And so I'll start writing it, and it'll be out in probably late May, early June.
Right.
And so I like that. I've heard other authors refer to that as an attack novel, where it's like an idea that attacks your subconscious and you just have to eventually write it. And so I like to leave space for that. I know the broad movements of the plot in the story arc for like the story arc's like 10 books. It's a longer one.
Yeah.
And a lot more relaxed, where it's more focused on the individual action of the book. And there's stuff going on in the background that'll come to a head in the last book of the arc. And so, that gives me a lot more creative freedom. And I think it's one of the reasons why I still enjoy what I'm doing is it's not very rigorous in terms of I need to know the plan 10 years in advance. No, I've got a general roadmap. I know where we're going. I started in New York. We're headed to LA, but we might stop in Omaha along the way. We might dip south into Lubbock, Texas. I mean, we don't know where we're going to get there eventually, and we're going to have a lot of fun on the way.
Well, I heard a story about Mark Twain that he would have just laying around different bits of his house partially finished manuscripts in every style. So like he'd have a travel story, he'd have a short story, he'd have a couple of novels. And just as he'd walk around his house during the day, he'd pick one up. And if it caught his eye, he'd work on that one. And then are you more structured than that? Or
no, I couldn't do that. I have to finish a book once I start it. I think I have not finished three books that I haven't finished since 2011. And one of them I canceled earlier this year and shelved last year because the events at the time. It was called Run Riot, and it was being written right at the end of May. And I'm like, this is not this time for this book. And so I tossed that one out. I might eventually come back to it. I cannibalized parts of it for the book that I actually ended up writing at that point. So there's not a lot to it, like maybe 3,000 to 5,000 words. And so that was one of them. I had a pitch for an Amazon publishing company a few years ago. They asked me for, and so it's driving me nuts still to this day that I haven't finished that one.
Right.
And then I've got a Sanctuary book that I am working on and will eventually get finished. But I'm telling you right now, having even those out there, it's grating on my soul. It's seriously like someone's taking a cheese grater to my internals. It's like, I must finish, because for 30 years of my life, I never finished anything. And the simple rule I made for myself to become productive is I will work on this thing until I finish it. And, 80 books later, it seems to be a somewhat winning philosophy. I don't like leaving them unfinished.
So you do one at a time?
Generally. Like I said, I've got a Sanctuary book that I've had to kind of pause work on in order to work on the main series, and then I'll get back to it when I get done with this one in 2 weeks and write some more. But I generally like to just do one thing at a time and just focus on it and finish it and move to the next thing.
And how do you know you're done? Like in other words, you get to the end of the story, but the amount of rewriting. My first published book went through 13 full rewrites before I was like, yeah, I'm okay with this.
Same. I mean, when I did my first book, which was Defender, the first of the Sanctuary series, I think I went through it 13 times or something like that. I mean, it was north of 10 somewhere. Mm-hmm. And then the next book, I got it closer to where I wanted. I think I only went through that one 5 times. And for a while, about 2 or 3 years, I did 3 or 4 drafts. Mm-hmm. And then a friend of mine's like, okay, your skill up is considerable at this point. Like, don't you get close after a couple of drafts? And I'm like, she's like, can't you cut like 1 or 2 of those drafts and still pretty much get to where you were going anyway? And I started to realize, there was a point of diminishing returns after I got to be a better storyteller, where I was just able to get it where I wanted within a couple of drafts, or at least pinpoint the major issues. And there are a few books I've released where it's been sort of the Saturday Night Live thing, where it's like at 11 o'clock on Saturday night, the show goes on, whether you've written it to your satisfaction or not.
Right.
But for the most part, I would say 95% of my work, I feel like I've gotten it where I wanted to get it, or as close as I'm artfully capable of doing so within the 2 drafts that I do now.
Well, that my fear about self-publishing, because I'm now at a point where, I've been with traditional publishers. It's been great, but I kind of want to write more than they want to publish.
Right.
And my concern is that if there was nobody outside me telling me delivery has to be on such and such a date, mm-hmm. I would never stop.
You could, what is it they say? Art is never finished, only abandoned. And I mean, that's true. I could go back and I reread my books occasionally when I have to in order to figure out a plot point or whatever. And I generally like them, but there's those things where I look in there and I'm like, oh, that could use just a little spit and polish, or boy, I wish I'd gone a slightly different direction with that plot point. And I find it's just easier to shut the door on yourself with that, because I came back and I re-edited Defender a year after publication. And I said to myself, I will never touch this or any other book again. Unless there's a fundamental problem. Like I altered one line of Girl in the Box 7 3 years after publication because people were writing me frequent emails saying, hey, I thought this villain was dead, but he shows up again in book 9. I'm like, okay, that's an unclear thing that I have.
Yes, that's fair enough.
But other than that, I'll correct typos. I will not correct for content anymore after publication. And it's one of those things where it's like, you're absolutely right. I could be tinkering with my existing body of work from here to eternity, and I would never get anything else done.
Yeah. Well, so what's a day in the life? Like do you have a writing schedule that looks like a job, or?
Dude, every day I have a written schedule every day.
Wow.
So,
and it's on yellow legal paper and a clipboard.
Every day at the end of the day, I write out my schedule for the next day. And so, I start off in the morning, I do 5,000 words a day. And some days I fail on that. Some days you don't succeed. It is what it is. But generally speaking, I have a weekly goal, because underneath the daily is my weekly schedule of things that I want to accomplish and my weekly goals. And so this week is 20,000 words. And I think I'm at 15,000 as of this morning. So I'm going to have to finish a little more this afternoon. But, I've got a podcast interview on here. I've got.
Thank you for that, by the way. I'm sorry to your writing schedule.
Yeah. Very important. And I've got time to read later. I try to do 30 pages a day. I've been reading a lot of nonfiction lately. And then whatever kid events and shopping I have to do, like my shopping list, I got to go pick up a ribeye at Costco later today. And it's just one of those things where if I know in advance of the day, before the day starts, the things I have to get accomplished, I can check those off. Yeah. And then the time is mine. I can do whatever I want after that. But it allows me to have the discipline that's not imposed by having a boss.
Your kids are still pretty young. Do you have like a rubber guillotine over your office door because my kids, when I started writing, they would come in at the worst times with really important questions about fairies and
incredible descriptions of YouTube videos, very vivid, very
God, you got to see this.
Yeah. No, and in fact, that is why I lost so much productive time when my kids were out of school last year. I mean, thankfully they've been back in school for a good while now. But yeah, no, I was very clear with fans. I'm like, I'm sorry, Sanctuary 11 is not out this year because my kids were out of school from March until September, and I can't get almost anything accomplished during that time, even if I want to. It's like I hear action going on in the rest of the house, and I'm like, this is more exciting than writing. I'm going to go see what these guys are getting up to.
But I'm introducing 3 new mischievous elf characters into the story.
No, I don't think that would end favorably. I try to keep my real life separate as much as possible from my fictional life. Although I did have, when I logged into Facebook this morning to announce I was doing the podcast, I had like 5 messages from different people. And one of them was from a fan who was commenting on a dog character I'd written into my last book. And it was like, it's a Pomsky, which a Pomeranian, a husky.
Yeah, no, I've seen them. They're really cute.
My neighbor, I cameoed my neighbor's dog in the last book because I was needing a dog, and I'm like, let's just put this dog in because I know this dog. It'll just be easier. But other than that, I try and keep my real life out of my fiction because it breaks the universe for me.
How much research do you do? Because you describe things in places in pretty great detail. I mean, obviously, I'm sure you're not researching Sanctuary, but I'm thinking in the Sienna Neelan books, the Girl in the Box series. Where
I try. I obviously travel this last year has been tremendously difficult, but I try to go to a lot of the places I write about. And some notable exceptions, it's like I have to use Google Earth. And actually, I've got some road trips planned throughout this year because I need to refill the bank of locations and see some new things and experience some new things in order to be able to write about them effectively. But you're right. I mean, I've generally tried to speak from experience, if you will, and put the vividness of what I've experienced in those places I've visited into the books and make you feel like you're there. So
I remember meeting the comedy writer Ben Elton in the 80s in London, and the story about him was that whereas other writers would come in the next day having written maybe one or two sketches, he would bring in a suitcase, not a briefcase, with pages, and just so like I'm guessing you're kind of a fast writer. You know, how long does it take you to do your 5,000 words?
Oh, I'm usually, I mean, if it's a decent day, I'm done before noon.
Okay.
But I mean, there are other days where it drags on until 3 or 4, and I've only got 2,000 words. I mean, it depends on how much attention I'm paying to the internet. If I shut off the internet, I usually am done before noon.
Yeah.
If I get distracted, less so.
Yeah.
But I typically, every 20 minutes, I can do about 1,000 words. If I know kind of in advance, I'll write it out. Like, what are the next 3 scenes? And that gives me a framework from what, and even if it's just one line, this is the tension of the scene. These are the characters involved. What am I trying to achieve here? And then I can go in and write for 20 minutes or 40 minutes the next 2 scenes or so. And I just can go right through it because I know what's involved. I know the personalities. I know who's trying to get what out of it and what the answer to the scene question is going to be. And so.
Now, how does that change when you hit the editing process?
The question then is the scene even necessary? That's question number 1. Question number 2, can I say it in a simpler way? Question number 3, how can I chop the sentences that are on the page in order to say this in a simpler way and lose, 10% or 20% of the written text? It becomes about making it more compact, not wasting any space on the page. And I still indulge. And there's character moments that are not part of moving the plot forward, but I do try and take a chainsaw to it and at least make an effort to make it simpler and flow faster and whatnot.
Now, how much attention do you pay? You do this thing that is super annoying that all my favorite authors do, where just when I'm thinking, okay, one more chapter, I get to the end of the chapter and I have to go to the next chapter. Like how deliberate are you with that?
Very. I wrote my first book or so thinking, I hate exactly what you're describing there. It's like these cliffhangers that these authors put in place are maddening. You're like, I just want a nice place where I can drift off to sleep and not have to keep reading. But the truth is I don't really like that. The truth is I like a page turner, something that keeps me gripped and going through. And so what I was kind of expressing in my head there was, what do I want? Do I want a lower tension book? Do I want one that I feel more free to pick up and put down on a regular basis? No, I just get annoyed because it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm still reading. I mean, that's mark of a good book is usually that you can't put it down. So I caved after probably 1 book or so. And I really started looking I took a class from an author teacher who delved really into cliffhangers and the other side of the cliffhanger, which is the opener to the next scene. And so I intentionally focused on it, especially with Alone. Alone was the first book I really put the effort in to do that. And that was the 3rd book I had written.
That's the first of the Sienna Nealon books.
Correct, the first Grow in the Box. And so I made it very intentional that I want you to read these in one sitting if you're able. And if not, I want you to have a hard time putting them down because I want to make them riveting and interesting and keep you, going. I don't ever want there to be a moment where you're like, well, this got boring. Let's go ahead and wash the car.
Yeah.
And so,
have you ever had writer's block?
That's tough because, for me, writer's block is I don't know what to do with the story from here. There have been moments where I'm like, I'm not really sure what direction I want to take it from here, but usually I resolve that by sitting down and writing almost a diary entry to myself and just going, here are the characters, here's what the cliff that I have led them to, here are the paths forward that they could take. And someone had mentioned at one point, comedy writers, they'll write down 20 punchlines to the joke in order to get past the 4 or 5 obvious ones at the top. I think it's Tina Fey's writing technique, maybe. And then you go through, and it's when you get to like number 15 that you start coming up with the really good oddball stuff where it's just off the wall, not obvious. And so anytime I kind of find myself with writer's block, essentially what I'll do is I'll say the story thus far and kind of do the recap at the beginning of the Netflix show. And then what are the directions I can take them? And I'll come up with like 5. I don't. It's not a punchline. I don't need 15. The first one's the obvious one usually. The second one is slightly less obvious, and by the time you get to 3, 4, and 5, it's like, okay, these are some oddball ones, but you've got to make it so that it fits with the logic of the story and the characters. So that's how I conquer. That's how writer's block has never really been much of a problem to me, unless I really just wanted to take the rest of the day off.
One of my favorite stories about Cliffhangers was in the 30s. When they did all those short movie serials before the movies, and
literally hanging by the
literal cliffhangers. And there was a popular series, and at the end of one series of them, the hero was trapped down a 30-foot well with smooth walls, snakes at the bottom, very Raiders of the Lost Ark, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and that was where it finished. And the writer decided to go to the studio and renegotiate his contract, and the studio was like, "Yeah, we don't do that." And they brought in all these other writers, but nobody could find a way to get the hero out of the well. So they finally had to cave to the guy's demand, and he submits his script, and the first line in the new script is, "Once out of the well, our hero carries on down the."
I love it. That is.
I always thought that was brilliant. No, so I read an Asimov interview once where he was asked, "What would you do if you found out you had 6 weeks left to live?" And he said, "Write faster."
Yeah.
Are you compelled in that way, or do you kind of fit this a little bit more into a life?
I would. I mean, if there was a death event looming for me, I would probably feel compelled to like figure out. I've got 4 series that are waiting, to be resolved, and I'm hoping to resolve 2 of them this year. And so, if that did happen, I mean, I would be sitting there feeling like I need to provide my fans with a sense of closure. There have been times when I have thought, like, maybe I should write out the last book. I think Agatha Christie did this, where she wrote the last book, and it didn't quite, for Miss Marple and for Hercule Poirot, and I think it didn't quite match up with the previous, because obviously she changed things as she went. But she had the last book, and I've thought about that before, and I can't find the time in my publishing schedule to write the last book. And so I think if I got a 6-week diagnosis, it'd be like, you're getting kind of a sum up short story for each of these 4 series. Like, I do feel compelled to provide closure. I'm not like, if I were George R.R. Martin, I would feel really, really crappy about leaving people on edge for 4 years. Like, I have one series, I haven't released a book in 2.5 years, and it was supposed to be, I was going to finish it this last year if I hadn't had Corona sending my kids home. So I'm not finish it at the end of this year, though. And so I feel guilty about that, So I can't even imagine saying it's going to be out any day now, and it, being, it's been 7, 8 years now. I mean, it's been a long time. And I feel bad for George too, but I feel bad for his fans as well, especially after the TV series ended as it did.
No, I read somewhere, and I don't know where, because you don't do these interviews very often, but I read somewhere or heard you say that you hadn't sold the rights to I'm assuming the Sienna Nealon books were the ones that they were after, because you just didn't want to lose control of the characters. Is that accurate?
It's a fear. I've only had a couple of offers, and they weren't what I would consider to be great offers. It's one of those things where I'm open to it if the right deal came along. I don't think it's a huge priority for many studios right now. I just don't necessarily think that it's something they're really interested in. So the offers I had, I didn't feel like they were a good fit. And so I'm open to it. If the right one comes along, I would be very concerned with this whole studio interference thing, honestly, because I mean, how many great books have you read, and then you watch the movie or the TV series and you're like, this really wasn't very good.
Well, it would be Tom Cruise's Sienna Nealon.
Yeah, exactly. I've made that joke more than a few times.
Because that was, to me, the craziest. For anyone who's not obsessed with books, the Jack Reacher series of books. Jack Reacher is this 6'5" mountain of a man, and Tom Cruise played him in the movies, and you're like, no.
Yeah.
And funny enough, I thought it was a pretty good movie, just not a Jack Reacher movie. Yeah.
The first one was great, which was I forget the name of the director. He's a phenomenal director and writer. He wrote Usual Suspects. He did the last 2 Mission Impossible movies, and he did a great job with them. But the second Jack Reacher one, Never Go Back, was just dismal and abysmal, man. And it's a shame, because the directors on that were actually guys who've done a lot of really great movies, but it just, I don't know what happened there. But
Yeah.
it did not work out real well.
No,
you're right. Tom Cruise. That's what my default joke is when people are like, "Who do you see playing Sienna Neal in the series?" I always say Tom Cruise.
Okay, there you go. So we're great minds. So this is where you're welcome to just tell me to bugger off, but I actually am genuinely curious as somebody who used to think he was prolific before he met you, and has a family. Like, how is it that you're still married? Like.
No, I'm done. I'm done by noon every day. My wife works with me. She's the CFO and chief marketing officer of the company. So we work together really well. And I mean, she's been home. She left her job. She was a director for a Fortune 500 company in finance until 2014. And I'm like, hey, I could really use some help with this publishing company thing because taxes and marketing and all. I'm just not very good at any of that. And she doesn't love the marketing aspect of it. She's a lot better with the financial part of it, but she really dove in, and we have lots to talk about. And I mean, she's downstairs somewhere right now, and we're going to hang out later and whatnot. And I mean, we like talking to each other and enjoy all that stuff. And so it's just, I mean, for me, it's been easy because I can write so fast, I guess, because I am done. I get up at 6 and start working, and I'll walk the kids out to the bus stop or whatever and come back and get right back to work. But I'm done by noon or 1 every day. And then I go do my workout, and we'll talk for a while or eat lunch or whatever. Or, sometimes we'll go out to lunch together. And so it's not very difficult. I imagine if it was one of those things where when I was in financial services, I was away from the house for 80 to 100 hours a week, out at the office or out.
But are you able to switch off your head from the stories or the?
Oh yeah, it's not difficult. It used to be really difficult. It was a lot more all-consuming, but now it's very easy to compartmentalize for me.
Yeah.
And so what I'd say is there was it required tons of passion on the upfront, and especially to write as many books as I did. But as time went by, I still really enjoy what I do. Like I never like, oh my God, I got to write today. The worst job ever. Like, no, this is the easiest job ever. But it gets easier for me to work on skill and fundamentals, and I don't have to tread on the passion quite as much, because the passion is like you got to read, 15 books a year on the skills of writing in order to figure out. Once you get the technique down, it gets to be more of I've been doing this for a while. I know kind of what I'm doing. Never like I'm a grandmaster or anything. I'm not.
No, but I loved in one thing I did read about you. You talked about how you got to kind of expect the first million words to suck, and I found helpful. Just not from you, but just that notion that you can't put the expectation on your writing when you start that you will put on it later.
I had a fan contact me the other day and was asking, about how do you even finish a book? And I mean, I get that question a lot, and it's that exact fear, right? It's the idea that I cannot make this come out the way I want it to. It sucks. I hit a point where I'm like, I can't figure out what to do next. And the answer is you have to make it suck until you finish it. Yeah. Even if it sucks, you have to finish it, because then you can fix the suckitude. And I've lost count of how many authors I know who have what you call a shoebox novel for their first book or first 2 books or 3 books, where it's like you finished it, but it's not publishable. It's awful. You hate it. And you even look through it, and maybe you look at it with your skill set and say, this is not something I would ever be comfortable punishing. And so you put it in a shoebox and you put it under your bed or back of your closet, and you never look at it again until 10 years from now, and you move and you find it and you're like, yeah, this still sucks, and I still don't have this. And so, the idea that the first million words suck, I mean, that's absolutely correct. And that, I mean, it's just one of those things where anything you do, you're not very good at first. And the more effort you put in, the more you build your skill level, the more you level up that skill. And so that's absolutely correct. And so to anyone who's thinking about undertaking writing, just be prepared for that. Enjoy it. And I had a lot of passion for it when I started out. And I still enjoy what I'm doing. It's not that burning hot, like it's midnight, my kids are asleep, my wife's asleep, let me go work on a book. No, I do it all day, every day, and that's good enough.
Yeah, no, enjoy the suck. That would be
embrace the suck. That's the way to put
it. All right, here's my last question for you. It's the last question I ask everybody who comes on the show. I have this special power. I'm capable of ordaining you emperor of the universe just for a time. And I'd like to know what your first decree as emperor of the universe will be. You are in charge.
Oh, great. My first decree is I resign. I don't want that kind of power over anybody. I have enough trouble in my everyday life controlling myself. I just want to be left alone. So I guess that would be the decree. The first decree would be leave me alone, and then leave each other alone, and I'm out. I mean, that's it.
Oh, listen, I am so grateful for your time. I am grateful for your books. Now stop talking to me so you can finish them so I can read some more of them. And thank you so much for coming on. We'll include links to all your stuff in the bio section.
I appreciate it, Michael. Thank you.
Take care.